how the eye of a tornado works. So, what's the big deal with the eye of the tornado? If you've ever seen a photo of a tornado, you probably noticed the swirling funnel cloud in the sky and maybe wonder why, in those terrifying videos of storm devastation, people occasionally stand outside looking oddly calm, like, why aren't they screaming in the middle of all that chaos? That's the eye of the tornado. But here's the twist. Tornadoes don't always have eyes. Unlike hurricanes, which reliably sport that infamous eye, tornadoes are smaller, faster, and more chaotic. Most don't have a defined center at all. When they do, it's rare and it's also a fascinating phenomenon. So let's ask, what is the eye of the tornado and why does it exist? Welcome to the Stuff You Should Think About podcast. I answer everyday questions about the phenomena and objects around you in quick, bite-sized episodes. I go get the answers because you don't have time to, and I bring them back in a way you can listen to on your break, on your way to work, on your way home, while you're cooking dinner, or any little bit of free time you've got. Hey, I'm G. If you're new here, let me say this up front. I'm no expert by any means. I'm not a meteorologist, a storm chaser, a scientist with a lab coat. This isn't a TED Talk or a lecture from a university professor. This is me, a curious person like you, digging into a topic with the help of research, experts, and a lot of questionable Google searches. But let's also be honest. I'm passionate about this. I love the messy, awe-inspiring weirdness of the natural world, especially the parts that make us go, wait, what do you mean? That's where the eye of the tornado comes in. Let's break it down. To explain the eye of the tornado, we need to start with the basics. How tornadoes form. Tornadoes are born from thunderstorms, specifically supercell thunderstorms. These storms have rotating columns of air caused by wind shear. When different layers of air move at different speeds or directions, this rotation stretches vertically into a thin whirling column, creating the vortex we recognize as a tornado. Now, here's where the eye comes into play. In hurricanes, the eye is a low-pressure, relatively calm center surrounded by the violent eye wall. Tornadoes are smaller, a few hundred feet wide versus miles for hurricanes. But the principle can sometimes apply when a tornado's winds spin super fast. The centrifugal force pushes debris, dust, and even air outward. This outward push creates a region of lower pressure at the center, which can appear as a clear, dark area, or a proto-eye. However, because tornadoes are much more unstable, this area is rarely as distinct or quiet as a hurricane's eye. In short, the eye of a tornado, if it exists, is a brief, unstable pocket of reduced wind and pressure where the storm's rotational forces briefly balance out. But here's the catch. You're not safe there. The eye can be an illusion. The calm just before the storm or temporary lull before the worst hits. Let's pivot to something unexpected. Bipartisanship. How does a tornado science relate to political census? Well, it turns out that weather safety and research are rare bipartisan areas. In the U.S., both Democrats and Republicans support funding for the National Weather Service, storm monitors, and disaster preparedness programs. Even in polarized times, there's agreement that saving lives during tornadoes or any natural disaster is a priority. The Storm Prediction Center and NOAA are largely nonpartisan in their missions. Their work, like developing the enhanced Fujita EF scale to rate tornado intensity, shows collaboration between scientists, governments, and first responders. This shared goal of public safety is rare. It's a unifying force in an often divided world. Now, for the tricky part. Grounding this in First Amendment principles and Supreme Court precedents. The First Amendment, you'll recall, protects freedom of speech and the press. How does this tie into tornadoes? Consider this. In 2005, the court case FCC versus Fox television stations addressed whether broadcasters could be fined for airing explicit content during emergencies, including tornado warnings. While not directly about tornadoes, the case sparked debate about free speech versus public safety during crisis. The court ultimately ruled against the FCC, but the dialogue highlights the tension between government authority to mandate emergency alerts and media independence. Historically, the 1977 National Weather Service Modernization Act is a key piece of legislation. It expanded the NWS's ability to use Doppler radar for tornado detection, vastly improving warning times. This tech, developed over decades, is a cornerstone of modern tornado preparedness. Look, I'm not unbiased. As a lifelong storm watcher who grew up in Tornado Alley, I've always been fascinated by the duality of tornadoes, equal parts terrifying and beautiful. I've seen documentaries where storm chasers describe hearing the sound of a tornado approaching, a low rumble like a freight train. It's eerie, primal. I'll admit, I root for the science of tornado prediction to get better. Not just because it saves lives, but because I want to understand the why behind these events. That said, I acknowledge that my non-expert bias might lead me to oversimplify complex systems. If I did, I'd encourage you to research further with a meteorologist-approved source. Let's talk about parallels. The eye of the tornado reminds me of the eye of the hurricane, which has been studied for centuries. The first recorded observation of a hurricane eye was during Christopher Columbus's 1502 voyage. He noted a sea as smooth as a mill pond in the middle of what he described as a dreadful tempest. For tornadoes, the concept of an eye is newer. Earlier meteorologists in the 1950s and 60s began documenting rare cases where tornadoes had a visible center, often revealed by the absence of debris in drone footage or satellite images. Another parallel, human response to disaster. The 1925 tri-state tornado, the deadliest in the U.S., killed about 695 people, largely because of delayed warnings. Compare that to today's systems, where alerts can be delivered via smartphone in seconds. Progress? Yes, but also a reminder of how much room for improvement still exists. The goal here is saving lives. So, how can we get there? Let's brainstorm without picking a best idea. One idea is better public education, teaching people how to recognize the signs of tornadoes and not wait for a visible eye. Advanced tech, improving radar systems, AI predictions, or drone-based monitoring. Community infrastructure, building safe rooms in schools or homes, especially high-risk areas. And policy tweaks, requiring all home builders in tornado-prone regions to install safe rooms akin to fireproofing in high rises. Each of these solutions has pros and cons. For example, safe rooms are life-saving but expensive. AI can predict storms but may face funding hurdles. The science is clear. Preparation is the only real solution. So let's recap. The eye of a tornado, if it exists, is a fleeting low-pressure zone where centrifugal forces briefly calm the chaos. Tornado safety isn't about waiting for an eye, it's about taking shelter immediately. Weather preparedness is a bipartisan priority in the U.S., with legal foundations in NOAA, the NWS, and Modernization Acts. The evolution of tornado science shows how far we've come and how far we have to go. That's it for this episode of The Stuff You Should Think About. A huge thank you for listening, and if you found this helpful, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future episodes. Download and leave a comment about your thoughts on this episode or a phenomenon or object you would like discussed in future episodes on whatever platform you listen to this podcast. Writing this episode made me reflect on how natural disasters challenge our understanding of both physics and human resilience. The eye of the tornado is a humbling reminder. Sometimes, even in chaos, there's a moment of balance, and we're still figuring out what that moment means. What's your tornado eye moment? When have you found calm in the storm? Let me know. I'm all ears. That's it for this episode. I'm G.